The first light of dawn breaks over the rolling plains of Gaul, painting the horizon in streaks of blood red and gold. Mist clings to the earth like a shroud, curling around the clusters of cavalry and infantry massed for a confrontation that will echo through the ages. Horses paw at the ground anxiously. The scent of sweat, leather, and the faint tang of fear hangs in the crisp morning air. Somewhere beyond the tree line, the Huns stir, their horns bellowing across the valley, a ghostly signal of impending carnage. In the distance, a lone Roman scout catches sight of a cloud of dust on the horizon. The unmistakable advance of Attila's horde, swift, relentless, and merciless. Could any alliance withstand the fury of the Scourge of God? The question weighs on every shoulder as the fate of Western Europe hangs precariously in the balance. Stories circulate among the troops. A young Roman standard-bearer who vowed never to lower his banner, a Visigothic chieftain who once rode with Alaric and survived the sack of Rome, whispers of divinely ordained omens foretelling victory or annihilation. The city walls of nearby towns shimmer in the morning haze, silent witnesses to a conflict that could reshape the continent. It is AD 451, a year that will pit the remnants of Roman order and the fierce Visigothic tribes against the unstoppable tide of the Huns. And in the heart of this tension, on the fertile plains near Châlons, alliances will be tested, strategies forged, and legends born. The soldiers tighten their grips on their weapons, hearts pounding with anticipation. History is about to be written in blood, dust, and the thunder of hooves. To understand why the plains of Châlons would become a crucible of fate, we must first examine the storm that brought Attila the Hun and his unstoppable horde into the heart of Gaul. By the mid-5th century, the Western Roman Empire was a shadow of its former glory. Political corruption, economic strain, and internal decay had hollowed out what was once the world's most formidable power. In this climate of fragility, the pressure from outside forces grew relentless. Attila, the ruler of the Huns, was not merely a warlord, he was a force of nature. Born into the tumult of the Eurasian steppes, he had unified disparate Hunnic tribes under his iron rule. His campaigns had already carved a path of destruction across the Balkans, the Danube frontier, and into northern Italy. Towns were razed, crops burned, and populations scattered in panic. He had learned from every encounter, turning fear into a weapon, his name alone enough to make rulers negotiate or tremble. The threat was existential for the Western Roman Empire. A defeat at Châlons could have opened the gates of Gaul and beyond, leaving the Rhine frontier defenseless and Western Europe vulnerable to Hunnic conquest. But the Romans were not alone. Flavius Aetius, the master of soldiers and de facto commander of the Western armies, recognized that survival would require more than Roman discipline. It would demand alliances with barbarian neighbors who themselves had grievances against the Huns. Among these allies were the Visigoths, led by King Theodoric I, a chieftain whose people had once been Rome's enemies but now shared a common cause. Their cavalry, hardened by decades of conflict and migration, provided mobility and shock power that Roman legions alone could not match. The geopolitical stakes were immense. Gaul, rich in fertile land and cities, was a jewel coveted by both Romans and barbarians alike. Hunnic domination would not only disrupt trade and agriculture but could permanently alter the balance of power across the continent. Theodoric and Aetius understood that failure was more than territorial loss. It would signal the collapse of order itself. Rumors swirled in towns and villages. Some spoke of armies dissolving into chaos before even reaching the battlefield. Others whispered of miraculous victories foretold by visions of saints and portents. The two leaders, Aetius and Theodoric, were products of contrasting worlds. Aetius, the son of a Roman general, had spent his youth among the Huns themselves as a political hostage. He understood their psychology, their tactics, and their brutal efficiency. Theodoric, by contrast, embodied the raw courage and resilience of the Gothic tribes. His experience in previous campaigns, including skirmishes with the Vandals and Ostrogoths, made him wary of overconfidence. Both men knew that success at Châlons would require not just force of arms, but coordination, discipline, and an almost intuitive reading of the enemy's maneuvers. Meanwhile, Attila approached with his own intelligence network, having surveyed the Gallic territories, learning river crossings, terrain bottlenecks, and settlements' defensive capacities. His horde, composed of mounted archers and lightly armed but highly mobile cavalry, could strike with devastating speed, exploiting any gap or hesitation. They had perfected the art of psychological warfare. Sudden night attacks, feigned retreats, and lightning raids left opponents disoriented before the real clash began. Civilian populations in the path of this impending storm lived in terror. From the walled city of Metz to small farming villages, families fled, seeking refuge behind hastily erected palisades. Merchants abandoned markets. Farmers burned crops to deny supplies to the invaders. In some cases, local leaders attempted diplomacy, sending envoys with gifts and bribes, hoping to stave off the Hunnic advance, only to be met with brutal extortion or slaughter. The stakes were no longer abstract. They were deeply personal, measured in lives, livelihoods, and the preservation of culture itself. Prior events set the stage with high tension. Attila had recently negotiated, or rather extorted, tributes from both Eastern and Western Roman authorities, testing their resolve. Aetius's alliances with the Visigoths were partly motivated by a desire to present a united front and partly by the harsh lesson that the Huns respected strength above all else. These negotiations, often tense and punctuated by threats, created an atmosphere where the line between diplomacy and battlefield engagement was razor-thin. Visualizing the battlefield through contemporary maps reveals the strategic genius of both sides. The plains near Châlons offered open ground favorable to cavalry maneuvers, while forests and rivers could be used to disrupt attacks or funnel enemy forces. Every hill, stream, and thicket held the potential to tip the battle. Both sides sent scouts and riders to chart the terrain, and rumors of hidden encampments or enemy ambushes circulated constantly, feeding paranoia and anticipation alike. Thus, the stage was set. Western Rome, relying on fragile alliances, faced the might of the Huns, whose reputation for ruthlessness preceded them. Civilizations teetered on the brink, and in the hearts of soldiers, hope mingled with fear, knowing that victory or defeat would reverberate far beyond the immediate clash. This was more than a battle. It was a confrontation of survival, strategy, and destiny. Every decision, every maneuver, every charge of cavalry would be etched into history as the world watched from the precipice. The days leading to the confrontation at Châlons were marked by an almost palpable tension. Roman and Visigothic camps sprawled across the plains, their tents and fortifications forming a patchwork of colors under the autumn sun. Soldiers sharpened blades, polished armor, and inspected bows and lances, every movement punctuated by the hum of anxious anticipation. Aetius, the master tactician, walked among the ranks, noting the expressions of his men, some resolute, others pale with fear, and quietly adjusting formations to compensate for uneven morale. The Visigoths, encamped nearby, were a formidable sight. Their cavalry, swift and lithe, pranced and whinnied under the watchful eyes of Theodoric the Thirst. Horses gleamed in the morning light, hooves stirring up clouds of dust, nostrils flaring at the smell of nearby enemy scouts. Theodoric rode along the lines, his voice carrying a calm authority that steadied the nerves of his warriors. "We fight not only for our lands, but for the survival of our families. Hold fast, strike true, and remember, fear feeds the enemy more than swords ever could," he declared, his words echoing across the camp. Aetius convened a war council in a hastily constructed pavilion. Maps of Gaul were spread across a rough-hewn table. Scouts' reports were read aloud, detailing Hunnic movements, river crossings, and potential flanking routes. He and Theodoric debated strategies, weighing the merits of defensive positions against the risk of being outmaneuvered by Attila's cavalry. The final plan was a delicate balance. The Romans would hold the central line with disciplined infantry formations, while Visigothic cavalry would execute flanking maneuvers designed to counter the Huns' mobility. Siege engines and catapults were positioned along the flanks to harry approaching forces, and supply wagons were placed strategically to maintain ammunition and food reserves. Psychological preparation was equally crucial. Soldiers participated in rituals, invoking the favor of Mars and other protective deities, while standard-bearers rehearsed the ceremonial raising of banners to inspire unity. Musicians played drums and horns, their rhythms pounding in the hearts of the men, building courage as fear threatened to overwhelm. Tales of previous victories, of the Roman legion's discipline, and the Visigoths' ferocity were recounted around fires at night, embedding a sense of purpose that transcended individual lives. Meanwhile, intelligence gathering continued relentlessly. Scouts braved Hunnic patrols to chart enemy positions, noting the number of warriors, their formations, and even behavioral patterns. Rumors of hidden Hunnic reinforcements circulated, some exaggerating their numbers, others warning of ambushes near the forests. Aetius used this information not only to position troops strategically, but also to instill caution and anticipation. Every soldier needed to respect the enemy's capabilities. Civilians, though largely displaced, observed the military preparations with awe and trepidation. From the ridges overlooking the encampments, farmers and merchants witnessed the meticulous drilling, the sparks of blacksmiths' forges, and the coordinated movements of cavalry squadrons. Mothers whispered prayers over children while older men recounted prior Hunnic raids, their voices trembling with memory. The world beyond the battlefield felt suspended, waiting for the storm that would soon descend. Weapons inspection became a ritual in itself. Roman infantry sharpened gladi, polished shields, and tested chainmail, ensuring no flaw could be exploited. Archers checked bowstrings and fletching, while the Visigoths adjusted the balance of their lances and reinforced saddles. Horses were fed and rested in staggered rotations. Even minor injuries were tended to promptly, for a crippled mount could mean instant death on the battlefield. Terrain study was another vital aspect of preparation. The plains of Châlons offered wide-open fields for cavalry maneuvers, but also contained ridges, marshes, and small rivers that could be turned into obstacles or traps. Engineers dug shallow trenches and erected temporary palisades. Scouts marked potential ambush points. Every decision, from the placement of infantry squares to the angle of approach for cavalry charges, was calculated with painstaking care. Stories emerged among the troops. A young Visigoth, barely 18, had survived a skirmish with Hunnic raiders the previous year. His face scarred, but his resolve hardened. A Roman centurion, haunted by memories of the collapsing Rhine frontier, vowed this time his legions would not falter. These human threads wove into the broader tapestry of preparation, reminding leaders and soldiers alike that strategy was only one part of the battle. The courage, fear, and resilience of men and women would shape its outcome. As dusk approached, torches illuminated the camps, casting flickering shadows across tense faces. The wind carried whispers of distant horns, perhaps Hunnic scouts testing their lines. Soldiers fell into restless sleep, their dreams haunted by visions of charging cavalry and thunderous clashes of steel. Commanders stayed awake, refining plans, pacing maps, and rehearsing signals to coordinate their forces. Every detail, from rationing food to the timing of the first trumpet blast, was under scrutiny. The day of battle was imminent, and the weight of history pressed heavily on the shoulders of those preparing for what would become one of the most decisive engagements of the late Roman era. In this suspended moment between calm and chaos, the plains of Châlons held their breath. Every campfire, every sharpened blade, every whispered prayer foreshadowed the storm that would erupt at dawn. The stage was set, the actors ready, and the audience, the fate of Western Europe, waited with bated breath. The first light of dawn revealed the battlefield in stark clarity. Mist lingered over the plains like a ghostly veil, only to be ripped away by the thunder of hooves. Roman infantry had formed tight, disciplined lines, their shields interlocked in formidable testudo formations, spears bristling outward like the spines of a giant porcupine. Behind them, banners fluttered, carrying the weight of Rome's fading glory. The Visigothic cavalry massed along the flanks, flexible and ready to exploit any weakness, while scouts relayed urgent reports of Hunnic positions. Attila approached with the precision of a predator, his horde a living storm of mounted archers and shock cavalry. Their numbers remain uncertain even to this day, estimated between 30,000 and 50,000 men, each trained to move as one, striking in unison. The Huns' advance was punctuated by the shrill cries of their riders, the twang of taut bowstrings, and the eerie sound of horns carried across the misty fields. The first arrow volleys darkened the sky, striking the Roman and Visigothic ranks. Some men fell instantly, others screamed as the arrows pierced flesh and mail alike. Dust rose in thick clouds, clinging to sweat-soaked faces and turning the morning into a haze of chaos. The opening phase was brutal. Hunnic cavalry probed the lines, feigning retreats to lure the Visigoths into exposed positions. Theodoric's riders, disciplined and wary, held their ground, countering with lances and precise volleys of javelins. On the Roman front, Aetius's legions held steadfast. Shields buckled under repeated impact, but Roman discipline turned potential panic into organized resistance. Centurions shouted orders over the din, using standards as rallying points to prevent gaps from opening in the line. Mid-morning brought the first decisive clash. Huns surged forward in waves, attempting to encircle the Allied forces. Roman archers loosed fire into the flanks, creating chaos in the vanguard. At the same time, Visigothic cavalry executed a coordinated charge, striking the Hunnic flanks with brutal precision. Horses screamed as they collided, dust and blood mingling on the ground. A young Roman soldier, barely 17, thrust his spear into the path of a charging Hunnic warrior, his knuckles white on the haft. Nearby, a Visigothic rider saved a wounded comrade by cutting down a pursuing Hunnic scout. The clang of steel against steel ringing like a bell of survival. The turning point of the battle arrived as midday approached. Attila, realizing his frontal assaults were being blunted, attempted a bold maneuver, splitting his cavalry into multiple contingents to attack simultaneously from both flanks and rear. The Allied forces, however, had anticipated this. Aetius signaled a prearranged counterattack. The Visigothic cavalry struck from both sides, while Roman infantry pivoted to create an inward-facing defensive square. Huns found themselves trapped in a deadly vice. Arrows rained down from every side, lances struck with devastating force, and the thunder of hooves echoed the chaos of a storm. The psychological atmosphere was intense. Fear and courage collided on every front. Soldiers fought not just for survival, but for the survival of civilization itself. Some men froze, paralyzed by the overwhelming spectacle of violence. Others fought with a frenzy bordering on madness, shouting the names of ancestors, gods, or loved ones. Civilian witnesses, hiding behind ridges or in nearby woods, could only watch in awe and horror as the plains became a theater of destruction. Despite the ferocity of the Hunnic assault, key leadership decisions stabilized the Allied lines. Aetius personally moved between units, correcting formations and rallying wavering soldiers, while Theodoric led a countercharge that routed an isolated Hunnic wing, cutting off their retreat and sending them into the chaos of their own lines. Attila's strategy began to crumble under the disciplined coordination of his opponents. By mid-afternoon, the battle had reached its climax. The plains were littered with the fallen, horses, men, and the shattered remains of wagons and equipment. Smoke from burning encampments mixed with the coppery scent of blood, creating a suffocating atmosphere. Yet the Allied forces, though battered and exhausted, pressed on. Roman infantry refused to yield, Visigothic cavalry executed precise strikes, and the Huns, for the first time in recent campaigns, began to falter. Heroic acts punctuated the chaos. A Roman centurion standing atop a fallen chariot directed his men to fill a gap in the line, personally engaging multiple Hunnic riders. A young Visigothic warrior rescued a captured standard from enemy hands, waving it high to inspire his comrades. Even Attila himself reportedly rode at the front, trying to rally his troops, but reports suggest the horde's cohesion was slipping under relentless pressure. As evening descended, the final phase unfolded. Exhausted Huns attempted a desperate retreat across the plains, pursued by relentless Visigothic cavalry. Some fled into nearby marshes, sinking into mire as horses and riders were swallowed by the land itself. Roman units secured strategic positions, ensuring that no large-scale regrouping was possible. The battlefield, once a place of organized lines and disciplined formations, had become a chaotic tableau of survival, courage, and loss. By nightfall, the battle was effectively over. Allied forces, though exhausted and wounded, held the field. Attila, recognizing the futility of continued assault, withdrew with what remained of his horde, leaving the plains of Châlons littered with the debris of a monumental struggle. The sounds of groaning soldiers, whinnying horses, and distant cries of survivors filled the air, mingling with the oppressive scent of smoke and blood. In the hearts of the victors, relief mingled with grief. Thousands of men lay dead or dying. The survivors bore scars, physical and psychological, that would endure for years. Yet the immediate sense of accomplishment was undeniable. They had stopped Attila, the feared scourge of God, from sweeping further into Western Europe. Their unity, discipline, and courage had forged a bulwark against a seemingly unstoppable force, and history would remember Châlons as the moment where civilization, against all odds, held its ground. The plains, now silent except for the wind rustling through broken banners and scattered armor, held the memory of a battle that would echo for centuries. Flames from the destroyed camps cast an eerie glow, illuminating the faces of survivors who, despite exhaustion and sorrow, knew that their stand had changed the course of history. The night descended on a field transformed, from open land to a theater of heroism, tragedy, and decisive triumph. As darkness settled over the plains of Châlons, the battlefield became a solemn tableau of destruction and grief. The once verdant grass was trampled, stained dark with blood, while the air remained thick with the acrid smell of smoke from burned wagons and shattered tents. Survivors moved cautiously among the debris, tending to the wounded and gathering the dead, their hands slick with blood and dust. Groans of pain, the neighing of injured horses, and the occasional scream created a haunting symphony of human suffering. The Allied commanders surveyed the aftermath with heavy hearts. Aetius rode along the Roman lines, noting the staggering toll on his disciplined legions. Though victorious, his face bore the strain of responsibility. Thousands had perished under his command, and the surviving soldiers were exhausted, demoralized, and haunted by what they had witnessed. Nearby, Theodoric moved among his Visigothic cavalry, offering comfort and praise in equal measure, his voice steady despite the immense loss of life. The bond forged in battle between Roman and Visigothic warriors became tangible, cemented by shared struggle and survival. Casualties were devastating. Estimates suggest tens of thousands of Huns fell during the battle, their once feared horde broken and scattered. Roman and Visigothic losses were also significant, though far less catastrophic, reflecting the disciplined formations and strategic positioning that had held the enemy at bay. Many survivors were captured and their fates were uncertain. Some were ransomed, others pressed into service, while a number faced execution as a grim warning against further aggression. Civilians emerged cautiously from hiding, encountering a battlefield transformed into a nightmarish landscape. Villages and farmlands that had witnessed preparations were now scarred by fire and trampling, livestock slaughtered or driven off. Families buried their own, weeping openly as soldiers assisted where they could. Children, wide-eyed and trembling, clung to parents who whispered reassurances in the shadow of the carnage. Stories spread of miraculous survival. An elderly woman who hid in a cellar while arrows whistled overhead. A young boy rescued by a passing soldier, humanizing the scale of tragedy and resilience. Leaders faced difficult decisions in the immediate hours. Aetius, aware that Attila's retreat might merely be temporary, ordered fortifications strengthened and scouts sent to track the Huns' movements. Supply lines were secured, and wounded were tended with what limited resources remained. Theodoric coordinated with allied tribes, consolidating positions and ensuring that no faction would exploit the temporary chaos. Their combined leadership transformed a hard-won victory into a foundation for ongoing stability. Psychologically, the impact was profound. Roman soldiers, trained for discipline and endurance, grappled with the emotional weight of what they had survived. Many Visigothic warriors experienced a mix of pride and sorrow, having demonstrated valor yet witnessed the costs of engagement firsthand. For both armies, the battle underscored the unpredictability of war, the importance of unity, and the thin line between triumph and annihilation. Amid the grim aftermath, moments of humanity persisted. Soldiers shared water and food with the injured, tended to the horses, and performed makeshift rituals to honor the dead. Standard-bearers raised banners over the battlefield, signaling resilience and defiance even in the shadow of overwhelming loss. Messengers carried word to surrounding cities, spreading both relief and solemn caution. The Huns had been checked, but the threat they posed had not vanished entirely. In the hours and days following Châlons, the battle's imprint was visible not only in the physical landscape, but in the psyche of Europe itself. Survivors spoke of the thunderous charge of cavalry, the disciplined strength of Roman formations, and the fearless courage of Visigothic warriors. Legends began to form, tales of last-minute heroics, miraculous survivals, and the leadership that turned potential disaster into a historic stand. The plains, once alive with anticipation and dread, now carried the echoes of triumph and grief, a silent witness to the day when civilization itself had resisted annihilation. The immediate consequences of the battle extended beyond the battlefield. While Attila lived to fight another day, his aura of invincibility had been shattered. The alliances that had held firm would endure, influencing the political and military landscape of Western Europe. Châlons had become a turning point, a testament to strategy, courage, and the fragile yet resilient fabric of human society under extreme duress. The victory at Châlons resonated far beyond the battlefield, echoing across the political, social, and cultural landscape of Western Europe. For the Western Roman Empire, the battle represented a temporary reprieve, a demonstration that, despite internal decay and waning authority, Rome could still mobilize disciplined forces and forge effective alliances. Aetius's reputation soared. He became synonymous with tactical brilliance, foresight, and the rare ability to unify disparate forces in the face of a terrifying adversary. His actions at Châlons would be studied for generations as an exemplar of leadership under extreme pressure. The Visigoths, under Theodoric also emerged with heightened prestige. Once considered semi-barbaric outsiders by Roman eyes, their crucial role in the battle underscored the value of their cavalry, combat experience, and loyalty to strategic necessity over tribal rivalry. Alliances between Romans and Gothic tribes strengthened, not only for immediate defense, but as a model for pragmatic cooperation that would influence later military and political negotiations throughout Gaul and Hispania. Strategically, the Huns' retreat marked a pivotal turning point. Attila's aura of invincibility was irreparably damaged. While he would later raid northern Italy, the psychological edge he once wielded over European rulers had been blunted. Tribes and city-states that had feared the scourge of God now recognized that even his legendary forces were not unstoppable. This shift in perception emboldened neighboring powers, reinforcing the idea that coordination, disciplined strategy, and alliances could check even the most formidable invader. Economically, the regions surrounding Châlons faced significant disruption. Crops had been trampled, villages burned, and trade routes temporarily severed. Yet, in the months following the battle, reconstruction efforts showcased resilience. Roman administrators, together with Gothic leaders, organized repairs to roads, bridges, and marketplaces. Farms were replanted, and displaced populations were encouraged to return under the protection of Allied forces. The combined efforts of military and civilian leaders created a temporary stability that preserved not only life, but also cultural and economic continuity. Socially, the battle left profound impressions. Soldiers returned home with tales of heroism and horror, shaping oral traditions and local myths. Communities commemorated the fallen, establishing makeshift memorials, rituals, and ceremonies that would eventually evolve into lasting cultural memory. For ordinary citizens, Châlons became more than a military engagement. It was a defining event that reinforced community cohesion and collective identity in the face of existential threats. Politically, the ripple effects were equally significant. Leaders across Europe, recognizing the successful collaboration of Romans and Visigoths, sought to emulate similar alliances. The Huns, though still formidable, became part of a more complex diplomatic chessboard. Attila's subsequent campaigns were met with heightened caution and organized resistance, demonstrating that the balance of power had shifted. Châlons was not merely a single victory. It was the moment when Western Europe's leaders realized that unity and strategy could rival brute force. Culturally, the battle cemented legends that would inspire art, literature, and historical chronicles for centuries. Eyewitness accounts, such as Roman chronicles and Gothic oral traditions, depicted scenes of unparalleled bravery, moral courage, and sacrifice. The narrative of Châlons became a symbol, the triumph of planning, coordination, and human resilience over chaos and destruction. It also influenced the emerging idea that alliances across cultural and ethnic boundaries were both possible and vital in the defense of civilization. Speculative. What-if scenarios only magnified the significance of Châlons. Had the Huns broken through the Allied lines, Gaul might have fallen into prolonged Hunnic occupation, altering the trajectory of Western European history. Trade, governance, and cultural development would have faced profound disruption. The survival of the Allied forces, therefore, not only preserved territorial integrity, but also maintained the fragile structures that allowed European civilization to endure and evolve. Historians and military scholars have noted the lessons in strategy and leadership implicit in Châlons. The battle demonstrates the value of intelligence gathering, terrain exploitation, psychological preparation, and flexible tactics. It underscores that even a numerically or reputationally superior foe can be checked through unity, discipline, and decisive action. These lessons transcended time, influencing later medieval military theory and the organization of multi-ethnic coalitions in subsequent centuries. By the end of the 5th century, Châlons had become more than a battlefield. It was a touchstone for the resilience of human societies facing existential threats. Monuments, commemorative inscriptions, and later historical works ensured that the memory of the battle endured. Trade resumed along the Rhine and Seine, communities rebuilt, and the narrative of unity and courage spread across Europe. The plains where men and horses had clashed remained scarred physically, but the legacy of strategic foresight and cooperation would resonate across generations. In essence, Châlons altered history by demonstrating that the combination of diplomacy, disciplined military organization, and courageous leadership could preserve civilization against seemingly unstoppable forces. It reshaped political alliances, restored morale among European powers, and provided a blueprint for confronting future existential threats. The ripples of this singular confrontation extended beyond immediate survival, influencing the cultural, economic, and strategic development of the continent for centuries. The Battle of Châlons stands as a testament to the profound impact of leadership, strategy, and unity in shaping the course of history. On the blood-soaked plains, Roman discipline and Visigothic courage coalesced into a force capable of halting the feared Hunnic horde. The victory was not merely tactical. It was a defense of civilization itself, preserving the fragile structures of governance, economy, and culture in Western Europe. Several key lessons emerged from Châlons, resonating far beyond the context of the 5th century. First, the importance of alliances cannot be overstated. The partnership between Romans and Visigoths, two groups often at odds, proved decisive. By setting aside historical enmities and uniting toward a common purpose, they created a synergy that transformed disparate forces into an indomitable whole. Modern leaders, military or civilian, can draw inspiration from this principle. Shared objectives and collaboration often outweigh isolated strength. Second, preparation and adaptability shaped the outcome. Aetius's meticulous planning, gathering intelligence, studying terrain, coordinating with allies, and fortifying positions, underscored the advantage of foresight. Yet flexibility remained equally vital. As Attila's forces attempted to outflank and overwhelm them, The Allied commanders adjusted tactics, exploiting weaknesses and capitalizing on the enemy's missteps. The battle demonstrates that success requires both careful preparation and the ability to respond dynamically to unforeseen challenges. Third, the psychological dimension of warfare played a decisive role. Fear, courage, morale, and perception were as influential as arrows, swords, and cavalry charges. The Allies' unity bolstered confidence, while Attila's aura of invincibility, once shattered, left his forces vulnerable. Leaders' attention to the mental and emotional state of their troops proved critical, highlighting that human factors can tip the balance in moments of extreme crisis. Beyond strategy and leadership, Châlons offers a timeless lesson in resilience. Soldiers and civilians alike endured hardship, loss, and uncertainty, yet their collective efforts preserved a world under siege. The battlefield became a crucible, testing endurance and resolve, and demonstrating that civilization's survival often depends on the courage of individuals acting in concert. In contemporary reflection, parallels emerge. Modern military, political, or organizational challenges often mirror the dilemmas faced at Châlons: powerful adversaries, complex alliances, and high-stakes consequences. Just as Aetius and Theodoric leveraged discipline, intelligence, and cooperation to counter a superior foe, today's leaders can draw lessons in strategic planning, alliance building, and crisis management. The principle remains timeless. Preparation, courage, and collaboration can overcome even seemingly insurmountable challenges. Finally, Châlons leaves a legacy of historical memory. Its plains, scarred by combat, became a symbol of resilience and determination. Monuments, chronicles, and legends immortalized the bravery of those who stood firm against the Huns. The battle reminds us that the choices of individuals, leaders, and ordinary soldiers alike can reverberate across centuries, shaping the trajectory of nations and civilizations. As the sun sets over the reconstructed plains in our cinematic vision, one can almost hear the echo of hoofbeats fading into history, banners fluttering, and the whispered prayers of those who survived. Châlons was more than a victory. It was a crucible of endurance, strategy, and unity, a defining moment that preserved Western Europe and left an indelible mark on the human story. The lessons it imparts about leadership, collaboration, courage, and adaptability resonate as strongly today as they did in AD 451, reminding us that even in the darkest hours, decisive action and unwavering resolve can alter the course of history.